Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jess and I'm super excited because today we have another wrap up slash TBR video for you guys. And I feel like this month I had another really good reading month and I'm super excited to talk about it with you guys. So I'm just going to quickly open up my notebook here. This notebook has been sort of like my book notebook, but also just like my regular day-to-day notebook. Like I've mentioned to you guys, like I have all of my upcoming weeks and things like that in here, but the book sections in particular have been so fun to fill out. I don't think I mentioned this last video, but I also have been keeping track of the different genres and all of that kind of stuff in here. Whoa, I have stuff in the back that's falling out. So just to kind of speak to what I actually read this month, I read 6 books in February, and the genres were general fiction, 2 mystery, thriller, suspense, horror type novels, 2 sci-fi fantasy novels, and 1 historical fiction. So a lot of these sections or genres that I've selected don't necessarily, like there's a lot of crossover, I guess. So for example, sci-fi and fantasy, the 2 books that I read were actually fantasy, but I didn't have a sci-fi and a fantasy section. So anyway, they're just supposed to be like rough numbers. But yeah, I'm super excited to talk about it. Before we do jump in though, if you guys are new here, feel free to subscribe. I try to do a mixture of vlogs, reading content, wrap-ups, TBRs, all of that kind of stuff. So if you guys are interested in sticking around, definitely subscribe. I would really appreciate it. I'm trying to grow our little community here. I also would love to hear from you guys what your favorite book of the month was and what your book that you're most excited for this upcoming month is. I always love to get recommendations from you guys, so feel free to leave that in the comments. Otherwise, let's just jump into all of the books that I read. So just to recap on my February TBR, I had a very ambitious TBR. I wanted to read The Ministry of Time, The Great Alone, Onyx Storm, A Man Called Ove, or Uva, I think is how you actually say it, The Villa, Anxious People, and Dance of Thieves. And I feel like I did an okay job, but I definitely got a little bit derailed. I read 4 books out of the 7 that I had set for myself. So I feel like that was okay, but I did read 6 total. The first one that I read was Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, and I gave this one 5 stars. I was so obsessed with this book from the very beginning, and I think that this confirmed to me that Frederick Bachman is one of my new favorite authors. He is so unique. I've never read anything like the type of writing that he has, or like the writing style, and it was so interesting because this was such a high stakes book but also low stakes at the very same time. So just to give a little bit more information about what this is about, this book is basically about a bank robbery that goes wrong, and it turns out that there ends up being hostages in a apartment viewing, like a condo viewing, and during this hostage situation with the bank robbery gone wrong, the bank robber is obviously in the condo, and it's just like this whole thing. It's very convoluted, and the characters are, again, kind of like not taking the situation very seriously considering the fact that they are literally being held hostage, but everyone gets to know each other in like a very particular way, which is very special. And just the way that Frederick Bachman writes is just so colorful and interesting, but at the same time like so deep. There were so many different times that I was highlighting just like the quotes he was putting in the book were just so deep or profound, or like I would just literally stop Ryan and be like, hold on, I need to read you this quote. And even he was like, whoa, that sounds like a really good book. So I really loved it. There was also a twist that I was just totally not expecting, and I loved that too. Definitely recommend this one, especially if you're interested in reading Frederick Bachman. Like this could be a good first Frederick Bachman for you, or if you've already read his books. I really liked this one a lot, so gave that one 5 stars. The next one that I read was The Villa. This is by Rachel Hawkins, and I had previously read a book by Rachel Hawkins, which was The Heiress, and I think I also gave that one 3 stars, but I was like teetering on a 2, and I feel like this book, I don't know, like I feel like it had me for a second, and then it like confirmed that I'm not really in love with her books. Actually, I forgot that I have this one physically because I rented a few books from the library. I don't normally have books physically, but this is always really fun when I can like show you guys or like hold up a book. So yeah, this one I had seen a lot on the internet because it is like very summery type vibes, but a few people online had said that it was actually like a thriller or kind of like spooky, or that it was giving them bad vibes, but I didn't really see see that in this book. I don't know. I think that there's some themes that if you're like not comfortable with those themes, then maybe that's why. But I just didn't feel that way about this book at all. It was kind of interesting. It was basically about this villa in Italy and went back and forth between time. So basically in the present timeline, this girl's life is sort of falling apart, and her best friend decide that they're going to go over to this villa and they're going to just like skip off to Italy basically and go take a vacation. Meanwhile, it goes back in time to the 70s when there was another set of friends who had gone to the same villa, and the villa was even renamed because all of these things happened, and like just like a lot of tragedy, I guess you could say. Like people died and there's just like all this other stuff that was happening. But I felt like our main character was supposed to be the character that was in the present timeline, but we so often went into the past timeline, like to the 70s, and that timeline was way more interesting than I felt like. I wished that it was just a book about that scenario and that it didn't, like I didn't really care about the present timeline at all. And then everything that was like supposed to be like a buried secret and all of these things, like they didn't hit. I don't know how else to describe it. Like they were just like fine. Like the ending wasn't that crazy, or I don't know, there was no, oh my god, this is wild moment for me. I was just kind of like, okay, like cool. And so yeah, for that reason, I feel like it wasn't bad, but it wasn't good. So I felt very indifferent about it. I felt like I was missing something by the end of the book. I said it could have been a little bit more twisty, especially given the scenery of the story, which 100% I agree with my past self. The scenery was so interesting, like being in this old villa in Italy where it's like a smaller town. It's not like a big city. There had been murders there before. Like it could have given Saltburn vibes, you know what I'm saying? But like it didn't at all. So I gave it 3 stars. I don't know, thinking back on it, I almost wanted to give it 2 stars, but I feel so harsh giving a book 2 stars because at that point I almost feel like I should be DNFing it. So a lot of the books that I read, if I'm like indifferent about them, I basically give them 3 stars. So that's sort of like my tier ranking for like perspective, I guess. So then the next book that I read was Dance of Thieves. I have had this one on my TBR for a little while now, I think like a month or 2. So I definitely wanted to dive into it, but I was very nervous because the first time I tried reading this book, I just couldn't get into it. Like I did not understand what was happening. So this one took me a sec, but I actually really, really enjoyed it. I dove in by reading the book while listening to the audiobook because I think sometimes it helps me to be able to like hear how like different tones are being like the different sentences are being said in different tones, and then that makes me feel like, oh, okay, they're mad or they're happy, or like this is a good thing, this is a bad thing, whatever. And like that helps me get into what the story is about, and then I can like pick up from there and read the book. So that's what I did, and that's how I got into it, and I'm glad that I did that. I read this one primarily while traveling, which normally I get very nervous about reading something like a fantasy while I'm traveling, but actually I had no issues with it because once I was in the story, I didn't have any issues with understanding what was going on or anything like that. You did kind of get thrown into the world, and I wish I would have known that there was an entire trilogy before this duology, but I still really liked this duology, and it just kind of made me feel like I wanted to go into the trilogy. So I am excited about that. I don't know when I will read that, but at some point I would love to basically go backwards. And despite the fact that I know how a few things obviously turn out because I've read the duology now, it follows a whole different set of characters, and I think it would be really enjoyable. So would love that. And I'm just going to quickly bounce back into Vow of Thieves, which is the second in the series. Also gave that one 4 stars. I liked this one a lot because I feel like it went down the political route a little bit more than Dance of Thieves did. Both of them have some politics in them. I feel like that was sort of missing in Dance of Thieves a little bit more. Vow of Thieves went definitely way more into the political issues that were happening in this like area of the world. I don't know, like it's not like our world, so I don't know, it's like the countries, I guess, I don't know, but I loved that. There were a few pieces that I kind of felt annoyed about, like they just felt way too convenient. A whole group of people running away from a battle or something like that. It was like, that's not how you win a battle. Like the likelihood of winning a battle via the entire other side running away is like, no. That's just not, that's too convenient. But I did like the very end. Like it left a little bit like of ambiguity to the story. And I really enjoy when authors do that to an extent. Like I don't want it to be too ambiguous, but I don't want you to spoon feed me all of the information either. Like the ending, I can kind of understand what's going to happen or like make up my own guesses about like how I think that the world would proceed after some big thing happens. And I don't really love when there's like a long epilogue or two epilogues sometimes that will kind of like just tell you too much about how something ends. Like I like the ambiguity a little bit. So that was really fun. Overall, I think there was way more good than there was annoying pieces, or than there were annoying pieces. And I really enjoyed the story as a whole. I feel like I could have gotten a little bit more love out of, or like romance out of this story, because it was supposed to be more of like a romantasy, but I didn't like there was definitely romance, but it felt very much like the characters quickly fell in love with each other. But the reality was that the timeline was just not very clear. They would go and travel to a different destination, but it was never clear that that would take months to get to. So it would be talked about in like 1 to 2 chapters, and you would think that maybe it was like a few days max, but it was actually months. So I think that like the timeline could have been a little bit more clear, because then that would have made me feel more like there was some longing between the characters before they just like immediately fell in love. But yeah, I mean, like I think that for duology it was really good. I think it's hard to dive into all of those things where like I'm used to having that build up across 5 books, where like that's just not possible when you have 2 books and limited amount of page, like 1,000 pages total basically between the two, to get this whole story resolved. So I understand the limitations at the same time. So yeah, I think, 4 stars. I would definitely recommend this one. I think that it's a really fun and good fantasy, and I'm excited to read the trilogy that comes before it. Oh, I forgot also, I had Dance of Thieves this whole time. So again, Dance of Thieves. I don't have Vow of Thieves because I read it on my Kindle, but I did have Dance of Thieves. And I also got this physically from the library because I wanted the map. The Kindle version did not have a map, and I just felt like I was confused about where we were in this world. So I really felt like the map, it's on the back too, I felt like the map helped a lot. The next one that I read was We Used to Live Here by Marcus Gleuer, I think is how you say their last name. And I gave this one 4 stars as well. This one originally was a story that was posted on the No Sleep Reddit, and I think it was like posted chapter by chapter or a couple of chapters at a time, and people would respond to it. And then eventually it got both a book deal and a Netflix deal. And I think it's supposed to star Blake Lively, if I'm not mistaken. I was trying to look it up, but I don't see that there's any release dates or anything like that. But I give this one 4 stars. I think that it was really good, but I think it left me with some unanswered questions, which is why I ended up giving it 4 stars. But just to kind of go a little bit into it, basically it's about our 2 main characters, Charlie or Charlotte and Eve. They're a couple and they flip houses, and they just recently bought a house in the Pacific Northwest, and it's kind of not too close to town, not too far outside of town. So kind of in the middle of nowhere, like by a forest. One day, Charlie's out of the house. She's off running errands, and Eva's just working in the house, and she gets a knock at the door, and it's this family who's there, and they're like, hey, the husband specifically is like, hey, I used to live here and I would love to show my family around. Do you mind if we like pop in for 15 minutes max? Blah, blah, blah. She reluctantly says yes and lets them in, and a bunch of crazy things start happening. And this book is, I think, technically categorized as a horror novel, aka why it was on the No Sleep Reddit. It actually scared me, like for real. I had to actually read this while I was reading another book because I could not read this one even remotely close to nighttime. I could only really read it in the mornings, and it was like actually terrifying. And I think it fed a lot on the fears that you like naturally have as a human. Closed doors, or like slightly ajar doors, or like under the bed or in a basement, anything like that, that like, as an adult especially, that like it's probably fine, but like it just freaks you out because like that's just like how we as humans are. It fed on all of those fears, and I think that's why it was like so good at being so scary. I really felt like the fact that I was genuinely scared from a book, that went a long way for me, because it takes a lot for a book to scare me. Like truly, I don't think I've been scared from a book in so long, and I think maybe that's happened 2 or 3 times ever in my life. So I really loved how scary this book was. It was like so scary to the point where yesterday I was reading a different book at night, and it got like to be maybe 10 p.m. and I was so freaked out that I had to go into the bedroom where Ryan was, because I was just like thinking about, do we have an attic? What is in the attic? I don't know. Is there somebody in the attic? Like there was just so many things racing in my head because of this book. So definitely scary. I only gave it a 4 because I still felt like there were a lot of loose ends that were not tied up, like a lot of questions that I had toward the end of the book that I just like felt like I wished I knew how it ended, or like not how it ended, but like there's just like a lot of things that like were called into question, and it wasn't clear, like the answer to that thing wasn't never clear. So then it it made it feel like it was like a loose plot point rather than you feeling like the main character was going through something or whatever. Like it felt less like because it was supposed to be that way and more like a loose plot point, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I think I can overlook a few of those things, but after a while it was just, I feel like by the time it ended, I was kind of like left with this feeling of like, okay, and like kind of like, why should I care, I guess? Which sucks because it was so scary and so good and like the buildup was intense. So I think it was just the ending that like left me a little wanting a little bit more. But again, still so good. I loved the journey, and for that reason, I think it deserved a 4-star. And the last book I also have as a physical copy because I borrowed it from the library. I read The Great Alone by Chris and Hannah. This was my favorite book of the entire month. This one made me sob, like actually sob. You guys will see. I have a reading vlog coming out in maybe next week. This one made me sob. Basically what this is about is a family. It's a husband and wife as well as their daughter. This entire book is told from the daughter's perspective, and the husband is a prisoner of war or former prisoner of war. Like he was in the Vietnam War and he eventually came home, but he had been trapped for years. When he came back from the war, he was just completely different. And for that reason, the family was uprooting a lot because it was kind of like the family could never really find a place where he belonged. Like he couldn't keep a job. He just was getting to a lot of fights and like he just wasn't the same person he was when he left. So the family loved him and wanted to do their best to accommodate like his needs now that he was back from war, obviously. And their daughter was very young when he left and very young when he came back. And you know, she just didn't understand everything, I guess you could say. So long story short, they get a letter from his war buddy's dad, basically saying like, hey, you meant a lot to my son when you guys were at the war together. And since his passing, he left you his property up here in Alaska. It's yours for the taking. And they take this opportunity to move to Alaska, but it's not just like a city in Alaska. It is like the middle of nowhere, Alaska, where you are fighting for survival. They are homesteading. They have to remake their whole cabin. Essentially, like the cabin is kind of falling to shambles. It's more of like a shack, and they have to learn to live off of the land, and they're not really prepared for winter at all. With all of that, you learn about how they survive their winters in Alaska, or just like their life in Alaska basically, but also you get deep understanding of each of these characters, their traumas, I guess you could say. Oh my gosh, it was so good. And I loved that it was told from the perspective of the daughter, because I think that made it so much more intriguing when you're like trying to understand why people are forgiving like different behaviors or things like that. There were so many different things that I felt like were so powerful in this book and just so sad. The ending was so sad. There's so many things that were so sad about this book, but it's like kind of, I mean, in true Kristen Hanna fashion, it's like your mix of everything. It's trauma, it's sadness, it's happiness, it's love, like the whole spectrum of human emotions are in this book. And oh my God, it was a lot. I mean, truly, I was sobbing. And I think that only happens with a few books. And Kristen Hanna just happens to do that to me every time. This one, I think, was like the hardest I'd sobbed though in any of her books. Really, really, really good. I read it over the course of a week, but I read a majority of it in like one day. It's really hard for me to just like sit down on the couch and read for an entire day, but like I could not put this book down at all. Like I didn't care about my phone. I didn't care what was on YouTube. I didn't care about social media. Like I didn't care about anything but my main characters, and I'm so sad to not be with them anymore. This is a book where I want an epilogue and an epilogue and an epilogue. You know what I'm saying? Like normally I hate that, but I want more from these characters. So anyway, long story short, I loved this book clearly, and I think this is another one of those books that I will just think about almost on a daily basis because it was that good. Okay, let's move into what I'm hoping to read in March. Because I set myself quite the TBR in February, I tried to calm down a little bit in March. So I only gave myself 4 books to read, which like in hindsight, I should have done that for February because it's a much shorter month. But here is my March TBR. I have it here in my my reading journal like I was telling you guys. But first and foremost, I want to read Us Against You, which is the second in the Beartown series by Frederick Bachman. I also really want to read Onyx Storm, which I'm carrying over from, actually I think 3 out of the 4 I'm carrying over from last month's TBR, but Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, which is the third in the Empyrean series, I think is what the series is actually called, but it's like the Fourth Wing and Iron Flame series. I've been kind of holding off on that one because one, I want to read recaps of like what it's about, and I know too it's going to be a longer one, so you know, I gotta get there, but I do want to read that one. The next one is A Man Called Ove, also by Frederick Bachman. I actually have this one physically as well. I bought this from Better World Books, so very excited to read that one. And the only reason I had put it off was because I got 3 books from the library, so that was kind of on me for getting 3 books that, like, even though I bought a book, so I don't know why I did that, but that's the last book I think that I have on my shelf that I bought that I haven't read. So there's other books that I own or that I've gotten from like little free libraries that I haven't read, but that's the only one left that I purchased. And then the last one is The Ministry of Time, which is by, I always forget, I think it's like Kayleen Bradley or something like that. But I've been wanting to read this one for a little while. I think this was Haley Pham's favorite book of the year last year, and I don't know why, like it scares me a little bit. I think because she mentioned that until 70%, like she was about to DNF it, and then it quickly became her favorite book of the year. So I'm a little nervous for this one, but I think this is one that I can certainly get through. So we will get there. But those are the 4 books that I'm promising to myself. I actually have no idea what we're choosing for book club this month yet. So that's also why I didn't want to give myself too much on my TBR, because I know I'm inevitably going to read more than this. But those are the books that I for sure want to get to. And I want to truly stick to my TBRs and not just like make some arbitrary list and then not stick to it. So that's my goal. But that is everything that I have for today's video. So I hope you guys enjoyed. And again, let me know what book you loved last month and what book you're looking forward to most this month. I always, again, love to hear you guys' recommendations and everything that you guys are reading, because I just like talking about books, clearly. So leave that in the comments below. And again, if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please consider subscribing. Again, it really does help my channel a lot. And I want to grow our little community. So thank you guys so much for being here and for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.